Chapter 14. A Theory. Half an hour later, I stood beside the body of Colonel Chetwood, making a thorough and complete examination. It was still clothed just as it had been found, for the local police had given orders that it should not be touched before the arrival of the detectives from headquarters. The body was that of a tall, thin man with aquiline, refined features, about 60 or so, with iron-grey hair and a mustache, and a brow lined by care and anxiety. His evening clothes, wet and muddy, in the broad light of day, gave the corpse a disreputable, neglected appearance, which was rendered even more striking by his dishevelled hair and mustache matted with dried blood. Bullen was alone with me, his companions being at the spot where the body was found, and as I proceeded to draw up the blind and examine the wound on the dead man's scalp, the detective stood by in silence watching my examination. The wound was near the base of the skull, and I found to my surprise quite a superficial one. By its appearance I saw that the police doctor had probed it and quickly found that the injury was not of such a nature as to have caused death. "Well?" Bullen asked anxiously. "What do you make of it, doctor?" "At present I can only say that death was not caused by that wound," I responded. "Then how, in your opinion, was the crime committed? What, in your opinion, was the weapon used?" he asked. "At present I am unable to say," I responded. "The natural conclusion is that it was caused by a blow from a life-preserver, yet a round knob could never have inflicted such a wound. I incline to the opinion that the wound might have been caused by a fall from the bridge upon the rough stones below. By the aid of my probe I satisfied myself that the bone was not fractured, as it would have been if by a deliberate blow dealt from behind. The nature of the wound, indeed, was very much as if it had been caused by the unfortunate man's head coming into contact with some sharp stone. Then, after a very careful investigation, lasting over half an hour, during which I took a number of accurate measurements which might be used later in the identification of the weapon, I came to the rather vague conclusion that the crime had been committed not by a blow, but by hurling the victim from the little bridge below which he had been found." "Do you believe that death was instantaneous?" "I'm not certain," I responded. "There is no injury to the spinal column which could have caused death. He was, without doubt, pinioned from behind at the moment he had crossed the footbridge and thrown backward, rolling down the bank into the lake." "His shirt stud is gone," remarked the detective. "That looks like a robbery." "I don't think so," I answered. "Why not?" "Well, do you see a long green mark here?" I said, pointing to the limp shirt front. "You see that it runs straight across the stud hole. By that mark I feel assured that there was no robbery." "I see the mark," Bullen answered, "but at the same time I don't quite see your argument." "That mark was made by a damp branch or bramble. When he fell he tumbled backward into the bushes, and, crashing through them, rolled into the water. One of the branches caught his shirt stud and broke it out. If you have a strict search made, you will find it somewhere near where he fell. His watch and chain and ring are still upon him, you will notice." "I quite understand your theory," he responded. "I will order active search to be made, for it is an important point whether the murder was done by thieves whom he discovered upon his property. It might have been that burglars were lurking there, and, being disturbed by him, they killed him in order to prevent an alarm being raised." "I scarcely think that," I argued. "If they were burglars, they would not have attacked him from behind without any ulterior motive. They would have remained in hiding." "But how do you account for him wandering about the park at that hour?" asked the detective. "That point can only be cleared up by his widow," I exclaimed. "I think we should see Mrs. Chetwood without delay." With this suggestion he agreed, and having rearranged the body, I left it to the police surgeon to make his post-mortem. Out in the corridor we met the butler, by whom Bullen sent his card to the widow with the request that she would grant us an interview. 10 minutes later we were received in the morning-room by a pale, fair-faced, rather fragile woman, the redness of whose eyes told plainly that she had been crying, but whose improvised mourning became her well. She was perhaps 30, certainly not more, rather handsome, with an air of self-conceit and a slight Cockney accent in her voice, which told me that she was not quite so well bred as one might have expected the mistress of Witton to have been. Bullen apologized for being compelled to intrude upon her privacy, but explained that it was necessary to make searching inquiries into the painful affair, and he would therefore esteem it a favor if she would answer one or two questions. To this she assented willingly, and, asking us to be seated, sank into an armchair. The detective had not introduced me, therefore she no doubt believed me to be an emissary of Scotland Yard. "Have you any idea of the hour at which the colonel left the house?" asked Bullen. "No. I think, however, it must have been about 10:30, she responded in a hard voice. I was watching her carefully, and saw by the nervous twitching of her hands that she was striving to calm the conflicting emotions within her. She kept her eyes, beautiful eyes of almost a violet tint, fixed upon her examiner. "But if he went out as early as that, you would surely wonder why he did not return?" observed the detective. "Ah, no," she said quickly. "I was in ignorance of his absence until my maid awoke me 5:15 this morning and told me of the awful discovery." She pursed her lips very slightly. That almost imperceptible movement aroused my suspicions. I had been told that she was on bad terms with the dead man, and probably that had prejudiced me against her. "Then he went without your knowledge? Will you kindly tell me how you spent the evening?" "How I spent the evening?" she asked with a slight start. "I mean, how you all spent the evening," he said, correcting himself. "You had guests here, I understand?" "Yes, we had quite a number of people, and after dinner, as usual, the men played billiards and smoked while we women remained in the drawing-room. About 9:30 the men joined us, a couple of dances were played, some songs were sung, and the evening passed without further event, as far as I am aware." "But your husband?" "Well, about 10:30 he came to me and said that he was not feeling very well, therefore he should go to his room." "And you never again saw him alive?" "No," she faltered. "When I saw him again he was down in the hall. Some men were carrying him in. Dead! Oh, it's awful! I can't realize it!" And she burst into a torrent of tears. "It is certainly a most painful affair," said Bullen sympathetically, "but we are striving our utmost to solve the mystery. Therefore I trust you will forgive me for seeking this interview. Whatever information you can give us will assist us very materially in our inquiries." "I don't think I can tell you anything more," declared the distressed woman. "But what is your theory? Do you believe that the announcement that he was not feeling well was a mere excuse for absence?" "Now that I cannot tell," she responded. "The house was locked up at midnight, and it was evident he was out then, for this morning all the doors were bolted, and the windows were found fastened just as the servants had left them." "Well," Bullen said, "that shows that he went out before the house was locked up. Were any of the other guests out in the park?" "Not to my knowledge," she replied after a second's hesitation. "Of course, the men went out upon the drive in front of the house and walked up and down to smoke after dinner." "From your statement it would almost appear as though your husband went out to keep some secret appointment. Have you any suspicion that he had arranged to meet anyone?" "None whatever." "And he had never mentioned to you any single person with whom he was at enmity?" "Never." "I presume that most of the guests who were here last night have since left?" "All have left. I am practically alone." "I shall be glad if, as soon as you can do, you will kindly make out a list of your guests, together with their addresses. We may not require it, but in this matter we must not overlook a single point." "But surely you don't suspect any of them?" she exclaimed quickly. "We suspect no one at present," he responded. "But in order to prosecute our inquiries satisfactorily, it is necessary to know exactly who was in the house at the time of the tragedy." "Oh, of course," she said. "I will make out the list and let you have it in the course of an hour, if that will do." "Excellent," the detective said. Bullen glanced across the half-open door, which appeared to give entrance to the library, saying, "If you will permit us, we will examine the Colonel's papers. They may give us some clue. It is just possible that he received a letter making the appointment in the park." "You are quite at liberty to act just as you think best," she answered with perfect frankness. He thanked her, then tactfully turned the conversation back to the events of the previous night. It might have been owing to the prejudice which I entertained towards her, but somehow she seemed anxious to avoid any remark regarding the period immediately preceding the tragedy. Naturally, a wife whose husband has been foully assassinated in a manner so mysterious would look back in horror upon past events. But in some strange and definite way she seemed to hold our presence in dread. Bullen, not slow to notice this, continued to ply her with questions in order to obtain further details of how the hours after dinner had been spent. "Who saw your husband last?" he inquired. "I don't know for certain. I believe it was one of the guests, a Mr. Durrant, with whom he played billiards." "After he had complained to you of not feeling well?" "No, he played billiards before," she answered, then readily added, "On leaving me, he returned to the billiard room to fetch his cigar case. It was then he wished Mr. Durrant good night." "Did he tell him also that he was unwell?" "Yes, I believe so. But Mr. Durrant sent a card of sympathy to my room and left without seeing me. I therefore only know this by hearsay from the servants." "You have a stepson, Lieutenant Chetwood. Where was he?" "With me in the drawing-room. Ah, here he comes." And at that moment a thin, dark-haired, well-set-up young man entered, eyeing us with an inquiring glance. This, then, was my wife's lover. Briefly, the widow explained who we were, and in reply to Bullen's questions, the dead man's son described how his father had managed to slip out unobserved, and how his absence had passed unnoticed until the awful discovery had been made in the morning. "You have no suspicion that he had any enemy, I suppose?" the detective asked. "None whatever. The terrible affair is a most profound mystery." "Yes," said Bullen reflectively, his grey eyes fixed upon those of the widow. "It's a mystery we must try to solve." "I hope you will," the young man exclaimed. "My father has fallen beneath the hands of some cowardly assassin concealed in those bushes down by the lake. He was the victim of the revenge of some person unknown." "What makes you think the motive was revenge?" inquired the detective, quick to scent any clue. The widow and her stepson exchanged rapid glances. I was watching, and it occurred to me that some secret understanding existed between them. My friend of the Red Lion had declared that they were enemies, but to me it certainly appeared as though they were acting in complete accord. "Oh," responded Cyril Chetwood rather lamely. "I merely suppose that." "Revenge for what?" "Ah, if only we knew the reason, it would not be difficult to find the murderer," answered the man who loved my wife. "It may be that some person sought revenge for an imaginary grievance." "But why was the Colonel walking at that lonely spot at that hour? He must have had an object. It looks suspiciously as though he went to keep a secret appointment. The excuse that he was ill seems to have been made with a view to securing his room from intruders who might disturb him." "He may have kept an appointment," his son replied, "but only he himself could tell us the truth." The detective acquiesced, and after some further conversation, in which I joined, he rose and, passing through into the library, commenced an examination of the papers laying on the writing-table. With my rival in affections of the woman who was my wife, I assisted him, while the widow stood behind us watching, her face pale and anxious and her nervous hands trembling. She was in fear. Of that I was absolutely convinced. But what discovery did she dread? While we were bending, examining the contents of one of the drawers, which was full of papers relating to the Colonel's duty as a justice of the peace, for it was here that he performed his judicial work, his widow stood behind me, and, with a quick movement, sidled up to her stepson. The next instant it occurred to me that she had passed something to him, but pretending to be engrossed in the papers, I made no sign I had observed their rapid exchange. "Have you found anything?" she inquired calmly after a few moments. "No, nothing, unfortunately," Bullen responded, and then, having searched the room from top to bottom, suggested a move to the Colonel's bedroom. Here the search, both of the clothes in his wardrobe and of the room where he usually slept, likewise proved fruitless. After 20 minutes or so, however, I contrived, while the others were busy turning over the dead men's effects, to slip back to the library. Young Chetwood had, at the moment when the suspicious movement had been made behind me, stood with his back to the black marble mantel-shelf, and it was to examine this that I returned. While doing so, I suddenly found a crack between the wall and the upright marble support, where the plaster had dried out by the heat of the winter fires, and peering within I saw something concealed there. With the aid of my scarf-pin I managed to pick it out, and found that it was an unmounted photograph that had been crumpled in the hand and was dirty. Mrs. Chetwood had managed to seize it before we could discover it, and the stepson had concealed it in that ingenious hiding-place. I spread it out. The picture I gazed upon was both startling and ghastly. It was a portrait of Beryl, my love, supported by pillows, her face expressionless, her eyes closed. The hideous truth was plain. The photograph had been taken after death. Chapter 15. The Grey House. I placed the mysterious picture in my pocket and remained silent. That my wife had been photographed after death there could be no doubt, for I, as a medical man, was, alas, too well acquainted with the appearance of a face from which life had faded, as distinguished from that of one asleep or under the influence of an anesthetic. Yet she was now living, bright, vivacious, and defiant. Had I not stood near her, seen her silhouette in the darkness, and heard the sweet music of her voice only 12 hours ago, it was incomprehensible, an absolute and complete enigma. Fearing lest suspicion might be aroused by the missing photograph, I took a small scrap of paper from the waste-paper basket and thrust it into the crack. No doubt they would return for it, but, finding another piece of paper there, would probably believe that the photograph had gone so deeply into the crack as to be hidden successfully in the heart of the wall. Bullen was still with the widow and her stepson when I rejoined him in the drawing-room, accounting for my absence by saying that I had been around the exterior of the house. He was again questioning Mrs. Chetwood, and I could discern by her manner that she was acting in accord with her stepson. To the latter I had taken an instinctive dislike. Although an officer of the hussars, he was an overdressed youth with a 3-inch collar, a cravat of an effeminate shade of lavender, a fancy vest, and a general get-up which stamped him as an interesting specimen of the Saltador Britannicus, or common or garden bounder. Presently we took our leave of the pair, and together went down to the spot where the body had been found. One of the detectives had discovered the missing shirt-stud, as I had predicted, while the various marks in the vicinity had been carefully examined and noted. I spent the whole morning striving to obtain some clue, sometimes with the others and often wandering by myself. My lunch I took in the bar of the station hotel. I had a purpose in doing this, for, during a chat with the proprietor, I learned that the Major had remained there 3 days, and had paid his bill and left on the previous evening. He had left the place ostensibly to return to London, yet he had kept that appointment in the park and had afterwards gone whither? The last train left Hounslow for Waterloo at 11:05. He had, however, not taken that, for 11 o'clock struck from Witton Church Tower just after I had watched them disappear into the night. During the greater part of the afternoon I was with Bullen, and at the latter's request assisted the police surgeon to make his post-mortem. But we discovered nothing further to account for death. Absolutely nothing. "What is your opinion?" I asked of my friend, the detective inspector, when alone with him. "I have no opinion," he responded, "except that the woman knows something more than she will tell us." "Exactly," I exclaimed. "I wonder what her object is in concealing any facts she knows." "Ah, doctor," he replied, "women are funny creatures. One never knows what motive they may have. In this case we shall be compelled to act very warily, and if possible mislead her and place her off the scent. She has given me a list of the guests which may be useful." He took from his pocket a sheet of writing paper with stamped heading, and I quickly glanced down the list of names. In an instant I saw that it was incomplete. The two persons whom I knew had been there she had omitted. Their names were Lady Pierrepoint Lane and Beryl Wynd. Without comment I handed it back to him. It occurred to me that it might be best to keep my knowledge to myself, for by doing so I might perchance discover a clue. That evening, having resolved to remain and watch the inquest on the morrow, I scribbled a hasty line to Bob, and then spent the hour after dinner in company with Bullen and Rolling in the bar-parlour of a neighbouring public-house. At the inquest held in the billiard-room at Whitton next morning, reporters were present in dozens, and the note taken by all was verbatim. For being the dead season, such a mystery came as a welcome scoop to those journals, whose only claims to notoriety are the sensationalism of their contents bills and their remarkable crossheads. The same evening I returned to Rowan Road, where I found Bob in his den, stretched out lazily in his cane deck-chair, smoking his big pipe with a whisky and soda at his elbow. "Hello, old chap!" he cried, jumping up as I entered. "Back again, eh? And with a murder case on hand, too." "Yes," I responded, sinking into a chair, wearied and tired out. "Most extraordinary, isn't it?" Then, at his request, I gave him a minute and detailed account of all that had occurred, and placed in his hands the hideous post-mortem photograph. "Well," I asked, "what do you think of it?" "Think of it?" he said. "Why, the mystery becomes more involved than ever. You are certain that this photograph is of her?" "Absolutely certain." "Then it seems to me very much as though she is hand in glove with the Major, her lover, and Mrs. Chetwood, and that they all of them know the truth regarding the tragedy." "That's exactly my theory," I responded, taking down my pipe from the rack and filling it while Bob poured me out a drink. "But the injuries?" I described them in terms which, being technical, of no interest to you, my reader, and he sat listening with a dark, thoughtful expression upon his round, usually merry countenance. "A fact which is very puzzling to me, old fellow," he said at last, blowing a cloud of smoke from his lips, "is the reason her ladyship was so extremely eager to make your acquaintance." "Yes, I can't understand in the least. It is fortunate, however, that she is in ignorance of my visit to Whitton." "Most fortunate," he answered. "My idea is that the truth is only to be obtained here in London, and not down there." "Do you think, Bob, that I acted wisely in keeping the secret of that midnight meeting to myself?" I asked earnestly, for I felt that perhaps I had, by so doing, foiled the activity of the police. "Certainly. You are in possession of two distinct facts which may lead us to a clue, not only to the murderer, but to the motive of your marriage to this mysterious wife of yours." "Does it strike you that the Major may be the actual assassin?" He was silent, puffing thoughtfully at his pipe. "No," he responded. "To tell you the truth, that isn't my theory." "Then what is?" I asked. "If Mrs. Chetwood and this mysterious wife of yours are acting together, Tattersett cannot be the culprit. It would rather be in their interest to denounce him." I saw the trend of his argument, but nevertheless clung to my theory that the man who had, in my hearing, proposed murder had committed the crime. The mystery at Whitton, startling though it was quickly forgotten by the public. Several times in the days that followed I went down to Hounslow and held consultations with Bullen, his assistant, but no fresh discovery was made, for not the slightest clue presented itself. A verdict of wilful murder against some person or persons unknown had been returned, and the matter left in the hands of the police. A week went past, but I could not decide whether it would be policy to call at Gloucester Square and have an interview with Beryl and her cousin. I recollected that the Colonel's widow had not given their names to the police, a fact full of significance, for it appeared as though she desired to conceal their visit to Whitton. I longed to see my love, to speak with her, to hold her hand and bask in the sunshine of her smiles. She had defied the man who had tempted her to revenge, and she had declared her intention of renouncing all the past. Oh, that past! If I could only glean something regarding it! If I could only stand by her as her champion without arousing any suspicion within her! This impulse to see her proved too strong. I could not resist it, therefore one day I went to Gloucestershire Square to make an afternoon call, but found the blinds down.
"Her ladyship is out of town, sir,"
the maidservant answered in response to my inquiry. "And Miss Ashwick?" I said, quickly remembering that she had been introduced to me by that name.
"Ashwick?"
repeated the girl, puzzled.
"There is no Miss Ashwick in the family, sir."
"Oh, of course," I said, rather lamely, I fear. "It's my mistake. I meant Miss Wynd."
"She's with her ladyship in Wiltshire, sir."
"At Atworth?"
"Yes, sir."
"When did they leave?"
"Oh, 3 days ago, sir. Sir Henry went with them."
"Did a young gentleman named Chetwood accompany them?"
"I don't know, sir."
"But you do know Mr. Chetwood, of course," I said.
"Oh, yes, sir. They say he is to marry Miss Beryl,"
answered the girl, smiling. "And his mother is a frequent visitor also, isn't she?"
"Yes, she's here very often indeed."
"And Major Tattersett?"
"Oh, he's only been here once, I think, a long time ago. He's a round-faced gentleman who wears a single eyeglass, isn't he?"
"Yes. Did he call to see Sir Henry?"
"No, sir. He came to see Miss Beryl."
"And he has only been here once, you say?"
"Yes, only once, as far as I know."
"I suppose you don't expect the family back till the end of September,
"Oh, not before the middle of October. They say they'll stay there through the shooting."
Other questions I put to her she answered frankly, and I left a coin in her hand as I turned and went down the steps. Why, I wondered, had her ladyship thought fit to introduce Beryl to me as Theo Ashwick? In deep disappointment I returned to Rowan Road. Every effort I made seemed to be unavailing. As the weeks passed in inactivity and I was still Bob's guest, assisting him among the few patients who rang the surgery bell, I began to feel that I must stir myself and find a fresh post as assistant. Rather than borrow off Bob, I had slid into a pawnbroker's one evening and exchanged the watch which my mother had given me in my schoolboy days for £2, and a ticket upon which was inscribed a false name and address. Of this money only a few shillings remained, and I had existed upon my friend's charity. While in this unsettled state of mind, I was called out one morning to visit a patient over in Brookgreen, and on my return entered a saloon-bar opposite Hammersmith Station for a glass of that homely and inexpensive beverage vulgarly known as bitter. Upon the counter before me the London Post Office Directory lay open, and of a sudden it occurred to me that I'd never searched the name of Ashwick. I turned over the pages curiously until I reached that headed Ash, and suddenly halfway down I came across the name I wanted. Ashwick Allen Wynd, 94 Queensgate Gardens, S.W. Without hesitation I went forth and mounted an omnibus, which set me down at the corner of the Cromwell Road, and 10 minutes later I stood before the house which the directory indicated. Instantly I saw that its exterior was identical. A large grey place with a great dark portico supported by 4 huge columns. It was the house to which I had been called on the day the strange marriage had taken place.